vehicle now! Exit the vehicle! Show me your hands.
Here.
33 at 15 an hour.
The first thing you hear isn't a voice, it's glass, a sharp crack, then the unmistakable, brutal pop of tempered window glass collapsing into 1,000 glittering pieces. For half a second, the night air feels suspended, like even the streetlights are holding their breath. Inside the car, a black college student's hands are up, open palms, fingers spread, doing that careful choreography people learn from watching too many body cam videos. Outside the driver's window, a Florida deputy stands squared to the door, jaw set, baton in his hand like a verdict. And the camera, whether it's body cam, dash cam, or a phone held in a shaking hand, catches the moment the deputy chooses force over patience. One swing, then another, and suddenly a routine traffic stop turns into something that looks and feels like punishment. This is the story of the stop that went viral, the window that shattered, and the federal civil rights lawsuit that followed, seeking more than $200,000 and alleging what the video seems to show in plain sight, that the deputy didn't just break a window, he broke trust. Before we rewind, quick question. Have you ever watched a traffic stop video and thought, if he'd just stayed calm for 10 more seconds, none of this happens? Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, city and state or country, and whether you think police should ever be allowed to break a car window on a non-violent stop. And if you want more stories where the footage tells the truth louder than any press release, hit like and subscribe. Not because it's a ritual, because it helps these cases reach people who never hear what happens after the flashing lights fade. Now, let's go back to the beginning. It starts the way so many of these stories start. A car, a road, a deputy behind you. Florida at night has a particular kind of atmosphere. Humid darkness, highway glare, neon reflections sliding across paint like oil on water. The air feels heavy, and headlights cut through it in thin, sharp beams. The student is driving back from somewhere ordinary. Maybe a late shift, maybe a friend's place, maybe campus. Nothing about his posture says he's looking for trouble. But then the red and blue lights bloom behind him, and ordinary becomes procedural. He signals. He slows, he pulls over, and inside that car, there's that instant calculation. Quiet, fast, automatic. Where do I put my hands? Do I reach for my wallet now or wait? Do I turn on the cabin light? Should I record? Because for some drivers, a traffic stop is an inconvenience. For others, it's an audition for survival. The deputy walks up, not rushing, not casual, measured. His flashlight beam sweeps the interior like a search. License, registration, proof of insurance. The words are standard, but tone is never standard. The tone is where the story begins to separate. The student answers. He keeps his voice calm. He says, "Sir." He asks what he's being stopped for. And in so many cases, that question is where things bend. Because some officers treat it like curiosity. Others treat it like defiance. And once an officer decides you're being difficult, every normal human movement can be interpreted as suspicious. A glance, a breath, a pause, a question. Now the deputy wants compliance first and clarity never. The student wants clarity because clarity is safety. And in that gap, between "because I said so" and "I just want to understand," the tension grows. Here's what the camera usually shows in these moments. Not just the words, the body language, the micro decisions, the way a deputy leans closer, the way a driver's shoulders tense, the way a hand hovers an inch too long near a seatbelt latch, and suddenly that becomes a problem. The student's phone is out, or maybe it's mounted, or maybe it's in his lap, and the deputy notices. Some officers don't care, some officers get careful, and some officers get offended, like you're documenting them, like you're questioning their authority. If the footage shows anything consistently, it's this. Authority that expects to be unquestioned reacts badly to being witnessed. The deputy tells him to do something. Maybe to step out, maybe to hand over the keys, maybe to unlock the door, maybe to stop recording. And the student hesitates, not because he's planning anything, because he's trying to do everything right. But the deputy reads hesitation as resistance. And then comes the line that changes everything. Open the door. Unlock it. Now. The student says something like, "Why?" Or, "Am I being detained?" Or, "I'm not refusing, I'm just asking." And that's where the deputy's patience drains out of him like a puncture. Because now, in his mind, this isn't a traffic stop, it's a contest, and he can't lose. The student's window is up. You can see his breath in the glass's reflection. The deputy's flashlight flares across it. There's a moment where the deputy could choose another path. He could radio a supervisor. He could slow down. He could explain. He could say, "Listen, I'm ordering you out for X reason. Here's what happens next." He could buy 30 seconds of calm. Instead, he reaches for the tool. A baton. A window punch. Something meant to break a barrier. And the barrier he chooses to break is the thing separating the driver from the hands that can grab him. That's why the sound of glass hits so hard. Because it's not just a window, it's the line between talk and force. When the deputy strikes, the student flinches. Instinct. Human. But in police narratives, flinching is often translated into something uglier. Reaching, non-compliant. Aggressive. Words that travel well in reports. Words that don't always match video. The window gives, and the deputy's hand goes in, and now the stop becomes physical. Not because of a weapon, not because of an attack, because of control. You can practically feel the moment when the student realizes no explanation is coming, only commands. There's a detail that sticks with people who watch these clips. It's not just the breaking, it's what happens right after. The tiny shards on the seat, the glittering pile of broken glass at the door. The student trying not to move, because moving looks like resisting. The deputy yelling, because yelling sounds like justification. And whatever the student says in that moment, it's likely something human. "Why are you doing this?" "I didn't do anything. You're hurting me." And on camera, sometimes you can hear the panic crack through a voice that's been trying to stay flat and calm. That's the thing about these encounters. You can do everything right. You can speak politely. You can keep your hands visible. And still, the situation can turn because the person holding authority decided your questions were disrespect. Then comes the aftermath. Handcuffs, a search, maybe a tow, maybe citations, maybe charges that sound official and heavy, even if they don't hold up later. It's usually framed as, "He refused to comply." But video often shows something more complicated. A young man trying to understand what is happening to him, while an officer escalates faster than the situation demands. And here's where the story widens. Because once the clip hits the internet, it stops being only about that one stop. People see their own fear in it. They see their own child. They see their own late-night drive. They see the way a minor moment can become a life-altering one. And they ask the question that always comes next. Was that necessary? In cases like this, what matters isn't only what happened, it's what can be proven. Video is proof. But there's another kind of proof that becomes even more powerful in court. The paperwork, the timestamps, the policies, the training, the internal communications. Because when a federal civil rights lawsuit lands, it doesn't just say, "That was wrong." It says, "You violated rights under color of law." And that's a sentence with teeth. The legal engine behind many of these cases is something most people know by a number even if they don't know the name. Section 1983. It's the pathway that allows people to sue government officials for constitutional violations. In plain language, it's the argument that says, when you wear the uniform, you don't get to treat the Constitution like a suggestion. The lawsuit in this story, seeking more than $200,000, doesn't just focus on the shattered window. It focuses on what the broken window represents. An escalation, an unnecessary use of force, a seizure, a threat, a humiliation. And in court filings, the student side would likely frame it as a pattern of decisions that turned a minor stop into violence. Now, cities and counties usually respond the same way at first. They defend. They deflect. They say the officer acted reasonably. They say the driver was non-compliant. They use phrases like split-second decision, even when the video shows minutes of building tension. And they rely on a concept most viewers have heard, even if they hate it: qualified immunity. In practice, it often becomes a shield officers try to use to avoid liability unless a court finds that the right violated was clearly established in a very similar case. Here's what that means for the real world. It means the fight isn't only about morality, it's about precedent, about whether a judge believes the law was clear enough that the deputy should have known better. But video changes the pressure. Video changes the story. Because it doesn't just ask a judge to imagine what happened, it shows what happened, and it shows what didn't. In the days after the footage spreads, the student's life changes in small, corrosive ways. He's in college. That means classes, deadlines, group projects, maybe a scholarship, maybe a job. And now he's also the guy whose window was smashed on camera. Some people recognize him. Some people argue about him. Some people decide he deserved it without knowing him. That's the cruel side effect of viral justice. It turns a victim into a public debate. And while the internet fights, he has to live with the practical damage. A car window isn't just glass. It's safety. It's money. It's the ability to drive to class without rain soaking your seat. It's the feeling of getting into your own car and not seeing that moment replay in your mind. And then there's the emotional side. The lingering flinch when a cruiser pulls behind you. The pulse spike when you hear a baton tap on a door. The way your body remembers what your brain wants to forget. What does a lawsuit like this usually ask for? It asks for damages, the financial attempt to account for harm. It may include medical or counseling costs if there were injuries, replacement costs for the vehicle, compensation for emotional distress, punitive damages in some circumstances, meant to punish especially reckless behavior. And often, it asks for something that matters even more than money: accountability, policy changes, training, a paper trail that forces the department to admit, at least indirectly, that something went wrong. Because for a lot of plaintiffs, the deepest injury is being told they're lying. Video helps, but court is where the denial has to face facts. If you've ever wondered why these cases can settle even when departments say they did nothing wrong, it's because litigation is math. It's risk. It's a jury sitting in a box watching glass explode on a screen. It's a lawyer pausing the footage and asking a deputy, under oath, why he escalated when the driver's hands were up. And even if an officer is convinced he was right, the question becomes, will 12 strangers agree? Because juries don't just decide law, they decide common sense. And common sense has a hard time with the idea that breaking a window was the only option. There's also the internal side. What departments do when a video goes viral. Sometimes there's an investigation. Sometimes the deputy is placed on administrative leave. Sometimes there's a carefully worded statement. Sometimes there's silence. But even when there's silence, there are always meetings. Risk management meetings. Legal meetings. The kind where someone asks, what does the body cam show? What do we have on the driver? What will a jury think? Is there a pattern? Because the most dangerous thing for a department isn't one bad moment. It's the possibility that discovery reveals multiple moments. Complaints, prior incidents, training failures, supervisors who ignored warning signs. And in federal cases, discovery is a bright light. It pulls emails, text messages, policy manuals, disciplinary histories, dispatch logs. Every detail that can show whether this was a one-off mistake or the predictable outcome of a culture. Now here's the part people miss when they argue online. Even if the student is later cleared, even if charges are dropped, even if the department says no wrongdoing found, the damage isn't undone. Because the moment was public, the humiliation was recorded, and the student has to carry it. There's a reason these lawsuits exist. They're not just about money. They're about forcing institutions to feel consequences for actions that would otherwise be absorbed and forgotten. Because without consequences, the lesson becomes, you can do this, and you'll be fine. The turning point in stories like this is often the same. It's when the narrative meets the video. The deputy's report says one thing, the footage shows another, and the gap between those two becomes the story. Was the student truly refusing to comply? Or was he confused, scared, trying to ask questions? Was the window broken because of safety? Or because the deputy wanted to end the conversation by force? Was there an immediate threat? Or was the threat created by escalation? These are the questions that decide cases, not just in court, in the public mind, because the public understands something instinctively. A uniform is supposed to reduce chaos, not create it. Imagine being the student's parent for a second. You get a call, not from your son saying, "I got a ticket," but a call that says, "I'm in cuffs," or "They broke my window," or "I don't know what's happening." And then you see the video, you see the glass, you hear the deputy's voice. You watch your child trying to keep his hands visible, and you realize there's no private way to feel this. Because it's public now. It's a clip, a headline, a comment section. That's the moment families decide, we're not letting this become normal. We're not swallowing it. We're making them answer. Federal court is not designed for comfort. It's designed for argument, motions, deadlines, depositions where every detail is questioned, and the defense will try the same angle again and again. He was non-compliant. The deputy feared for his safety. The deputy acted within training. The deputy needed to gain control. But the plaintiff's argument is usually simpler. Watch the tape, count the seconds, look at the hands, listen to the tone. Ask what could have happened if the deputy had slowed down. Because sometimes the most damning thing isn't what an officer did. It's what he didn't have to do. And that's why, even when the dollar amount in a lawsuit is only a couple $100,000, departments take it seriously. Because it's not just the money, it's the admission. Even if they write "no admission of wrongdoing" on the paperwork, the check says something anyway. It says, we don't want a jury to see this. We don't want discovery to dig deeper. We don't want more videos to surface. And sometimes, that's the closest thing to accountability you get in a system that rarely says, "We were wrong," out loud. So what does this story come down to? A window, a decision, and the thin, fragile line between compliance and dignity. Because there's a difference between refusing a lawful order and asking for clarity. There's a difference between a threat and a question. And there's a difference between policing that protects and policing that punishes. When a deputy breaks a window on camera, the public doesn't just see broken glass. They see the escalation. They see how quickly authority can become force. They see how small the trigger can be when someone with power feels challenged. And they ask the question that always follows. If that can happen to a college student on a roadside, what happens to someone with no camera, no community backing, no legal resources, no way to make the system answer? Now let's tie it back to the sound we started with. That crack, that pop, that instant when safety turned into spectacle. That moment doesn't just live in a clip, it lives in a person, in the way he grips a steering wheel later, in the way he checks mirrors, in the way he learns, too early, that calm doesn't always protect you. And the lawsuit, whatever its final outcome, exists for a reason. To put the moment on record, to force sworn testimony, to make a court look at a simple question, was the force reasonable? Or was it a deputy's impatience, captured in high definition? Because the truth is, Windows can be replaced. Glass can be repaired. But the lesson a young person learns when a badge chooses violence, that one is harder to fix. So I'll end with this. If you were in that driver's seat, hands up, window shaking under a baton, what would you do? Would you comply with anything just to end it? Would you keep asking questions? Would you record? And do you think breaking a window should ever be an option when there's no immediate danger? Tell me what you think in the comments. Because the way we answer that question, culturally, legally, and personally, is the difference between a traffic stop being a check and a traffic stop becoming a headline.
Get back! Get back! Get back! Let go! Whoa! Kill someone else! Go for it! Kill someone else!
The canister didn't look dangerous at first. It was bright, almost cartoonish, an orange cylinder flashing in the sun as it cleared the agent's hand. For a split second, the crowd didn't even react. People were still chanting, phones were still raised, someone was still beating on a plastic bucket like it was a drum. Then the shot snapped out with a dry, ugly thunk, not a gunshot, but loud enough to make shoulders flinch. And the orange cartridge hit the face of a black protester in a green hoodie so close that the impact sounded like a fist. His head jerked back, his phone dropped, and the air around him, clean one moment, turned into a burning cloud the next. He staggered, hands flying to his eyes, trying to breathe through pain that didn't feel like pain anymore. It felt like his face was on fire from the inside. The agent took one step forward, posture rigid, like he'd done something routine. Like he'd just cleared a problem. And that's when the people closest to the blast stopped chanting and started screaming. Because whatever you call it, crowd control, dispersal, enforcement, there are things you don't do at point-blank range to someone's face. Not unless you've decided they don't count the same way you do. This is the story of the orange canister, the green hoodie, and the ICE agent who thought the moment would disappear into the noise of a protest until the video made it impossible to look away. It happened in the middle of the day, outside a federal building that was built to look permanent. White stone, flags in the wind, cameras bolted to corners. A plaza designed for public access that always feels like it belongs to the government more than it belongs to you. The city called it the Rivergate Federal Complex. To the people in the street that afternoon, it was the spot where a rumor had become panic. ICE agents had been seen earlier that morning near an industrial block where day laborers gathered. A few unmarked vans, men in tactical vests, a woman sobbing on the sidewalk, saying her brother had been taken. No one had a full picture yet, but the anger was real, and it had a target. So by noon, the plaza was packed. Not a riot, not chaos, a protest, handmade signs, families, students. A couple of older pastors standing together like they'd done this before. And in the middle of it all was the guy in the green hoodie. His name was Miles Carter, 24, warehouse job on weekdays, community college on nights, the kind of person who never planned on being a headline, but had a habit of showing up when people needed bodies in the street. He wasn't carrying anything. No mask, no stick, no fireworks, just a phone and a voice that kept yelling the same sentence into the air, like he was trying to keep it from slipping away. This is our city. You can't disappear, people. Before we go further, quick question. Where are you watching from? Drop your city, your state, your country in the comments, because the crazy part about stories like this is how often the details change, but the feeling stays the same. And if you want more deep dive stories where the footage, the paperwork, and the aftermath tell you what really happened, hit like and subscribe. It helps these cases get seen instead of buried. Now, back to Rivergate. Because the orange canister wasn't the beginning. It was the collision point. At first, the line of officers looked like any other protest response. Local police at the perimeter, barricades, a couple of bikes blocking the street, But then the second layer showed up. The people in darker gear, different posture, different patchwork of uniforms, faces harder to read because half of them were covered. And the moment that line formed near the federal building doors, the crowd energy changed. Not louder, sharper, because federal agents aren't supposed to be part of a protest scene unless something has already shifted into a different category. Miles noticed them immediately. He wasn't the only one. Phones zoomed in. People started calling out questions that weren't really questions. Who are you? Why are you here? Where did you take them? A woman with a megaphone kept repeating, "Stay peaceful, stay calm." And for a while, it worked. The protest moved like a wave. Forward, back, forward again, pressed up against invisible boundaries the city didn't want to admit were there. Miles stayed near the front, but not at the very edge, close enough to be heard, far enough to avoid the hands. That's what he thought anyway. The official story, later, would be simple. There was a protest. It became unruly. Agents feared for safety. A dispersal tool was used. That's the kind of language that sounds clean in a report. But the video from that day, especially the clip that blew up first, didn't look like a riot. It looked like a standoff, a line of agents, a line of people, and one moment where a decision got made in half a second. Because the first angle, shot from behind Miles, captured the setup like a warning nobody understood. You can see Miles in the green hoodie stepping forward with both hands visible, his phone up at chest level like a shield made of glass. You can hear him shouting, not threats but words. "You're not above the law." Then you see the agent, tall, broad shoulders, black vest, lift his arm. Orange cylinder. A quick flick, and the shot. Miles doesn't charge, he doesn't lunge, he doesn't throw anything. He just gets hit, and the crowd doesn't explode into violence. It explodes into panic. Because once that canister hits someone's face, no one is thinking about slogans anymore. They're thinking, if they'll do that to him, what will they do to the rest of us? One knee, coughing so hard his body folded in on itself. People rushed toward him, but that's the thing about chemical irritants. The closer you get, the more you breathe it in. A woman reached for his shoulder and recoiled. "His eyes! Oh my God! His eyes!" Someone screamed, "Medic!" And a volunteer medic, Red Cross taped to their backpack, pushed through, squinting through tears because the air was already burning. The agent line didn't step back. They didn't pause. They advanced. Slow, heavy steps, like a machine moving forward because that's what it was built to do. And this is where you see the second part of the story form. Not just the force, the attitude. Because in the clip, you can hear Miles trying to talk through choking. I can't see." And you can hear a voice, calm, almost bored, say, "Move back." Not "Are you okay?" Not "Clear space," just "Move back." Like the problem wasn't that a man had been struck in the face. The problem was that he was still there. Miles didn't go to the hospital right away. That sounds insane, but it's the kind of decision people make in moments like this. He stumbled to the side with help, blinking through tears that wouldn't stop, trying to breathe air that still felt like fire. He kept saying, "I'm good," the way people say, "I'm fine," when they're clearly not. Then someone finally grabbed his elbow hard and said, "No, you're not. Sit down." They got him water, milk, anything. And when an ambulance finally arrived, it wasn't because the system rushed to help. It was because the crowd wouldn't let the moment be swallowed. Because there's a difference between an injury and an incident. An injury is what happens to you. An incident is what happens to you when other people start documenting it. By that evening, Miles's face was swollen in places that made people wince just looking at it. His eyes, both of them, were red like raw meat. He sat on the edge of a hospital bed with a paper gown hanging off one shoulder, and the nurse kept checking him like she didn't trust the world to stop hurting him just because he was indoors. Miles's sister, Nia, sat beside him with her phone. Not doom scrolling, collecting. She kept refreshing the same page because the video was spreading faster than the hospital could treat the consequences. At first, it was just one clip. A shaky angle, loud screaming. The orange cylinder hard to see unless you paused at the right moment. Then more angles appeared. Different phones, different distances, and the story got worse with every new frame. Because the second angle, the one that changed everything, came from the side. A guy standing near a concrete planter, filming in crisp focus. In that footage, you can clearly see the spacing. You can clearly see Miles. And you can clearly see how close the agent is when he fires. Not across the street, not from a safe distance. Close enough that it looks personal. Close enough that it stops looking like crowd control and starts looking like punishment. That angle didn't just go viral, it went legal, because it answered the question everyone asked in the comments. Did he aim at his face? The footage made it hard to argue otherwise. The next day, the agency response arrived right on schedule. A statement, short, careful. Words like reviewing and appropriate and ongoing. No names, no admissions, no acknowledgement of the green hoodie, the orange cartridge, or the fact that a man had to be treated for injuries after being struck. Just the institutional version of a shrug. And for about 12 hours, it looked like that might work. Because news cycles move fast, people move on. Then the local police scanner audio leaked, and the crowd heard something that made their stomachs drop. A voice on the radio referencing less lethal deployment and subject non-compliance, as if Miles had been some kind of threat. Miles's sister heard it in the hospital and went still. "He didn't do anything," she kept saying, like repetition could hold the truth in place. But the system was already building its version. And that's where this story shifts from a protest clip to a case. Because when two narratives collide, footage versus paperwork, someone eventually has to decide which one is reality. Miles was discharged with instructions and follow-up appointments, but what he took home was something else. He took home the feeling of being targeted. It sounds abstract until you see how it shows up. He stopped going to work for a few days, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't want to be seen. His eyes were still sensitive, his face still tender, and every time he shut the bathroom door to rinse his face, he saw the orange cylinder in his mind like a flashbulb. He started flinching when he heard sirens. He started checking exits in places where he used to just exist. And if you've never had to rewrite your body language to survive, you might think that's dramatic. It's not, it's conditioning. The lesson the world teaches when it shows you, in public, that your safety is negotiable. 3 days after the protest, a lawyer reached out. Not a celebrity lawyer. A civil rights attorney named Dana Reeves, who had handled cases that started with small incidents and ended with large consequences when juries saw the footage. Dana didn't promise revenge. She promised process. She watched the video. Then she watched it again, frame by frame. Then she asked Miles a question that didn't sound legal, but was. "Did anyone tell you to move before he fired?" Miles shook his head. "No, he just did it." Dinah nodded slowly. "And after you were hit," she asked, "did anyone offer help?" Miles laughed once, bitter, then stopped because laughing still made his face hurt. "No," he said. "They walked forward like I was in the way." Dinah took a breath. "Okay," she said. "Then we're going to do this the right way. We're going to get every angle, every report, every policy, and we're going to find out why an agent felt comfortable doing that in front of cameras. Because that's the hidden question underneath the orange canister. Not just what happened, but what kind of environment makes a person believe they can do it and get away with it." The first request went out for records. The city had cameras on the federal building. Private businesses had cameras across the street. Local police had body cams. There were dispatch logs, There were after-action reports, and the government's first move was predictable. Delay, redactions, claims of sensitivity. But the footage was already public, and the public doesn't forget what it sees. So the pressure built, not just from social media, from local officials who didn't want their city's name attached to the phrase, "ICE agent shot protester in the face," for the next 10 years, from activists organizing press conferences outside City Hall, from journalists who kept asking the same question in different ways. Was this within policy? And this is where the case got dangerous for the government. Because even if you argue a dispersal tool is allowed, you still have to explain the target and the distance. You still have to explain why the agent's first instinct wasn't to de-escalate. And you still have to explain why it happened to the guy in the green hoodie who wasn't doing anything violent. A week later, a new clip surfaced, short, brutal, and quietly devastating. It came from a building entrance camera across the plaza. No audio, no drama, just a wide, stable angle that showed movement like a diagram. You see Miles step forward, phone up. You see the agent step toward him. You see the agent lift his arm, and you see the orange cartridge leave his hand. The clean geometry of it removed any confusion argument. The agent wasn't reacting to a thrown object. He wasn't shielding himself from a rush. He wasn't firing into a crowd from far away. He was aiming at a person. That clip didn't just spark outrage, it changed the negotiation posture behind closed doors. Because once footage like that exists, you stop asking, "Can we win?" You start asking, "How expensive is losing?" Then came the turning point, the thing that made this story impossible to bury. It wasn't a new video, it was a line in a report. In a draft after-action summary, one that leaked before it could be polished into something safer, there was a description of Miles that made Dana Reeves sit back in her chair. Agitator, not protester, not subject. Agitator. A word that doesn't describe a crime. It describes a person you've already decided to punish. And when you combine that mindset with a tool designed to cause pain, you get exactly what happened in Rivergate. Dana sent that word to Miles in a screenshot. Miles stared at it for a long time. "That's what they think I am," he said. Dana didn't argue. "I know," she replied, "and now we're going to show what they did because of it." The lawsuit didn't read like a viral clip. It read like a slow, methodical dismantling. It described the protest, the lack of warning, the close-range deployment, the injury, the failure to render aid, the emotional fallout, the chilling effect, how people avoid exercising their rights when they believe they'll be punished for it. And it asked for accountability in the language institutions understand. Money, yes, but also policy changes, training, discipline, admissions that don't hide behind ongoing review. The government response was what you'd expect. They tried to frame it as a chaotic scene. They suggested Miles was non-compliant. They leaned on broad language about safety. But they had a problem. Miles had a green hoodie, the agent had an orange canister, and the cameras had the rest. While the case moved through legal channels, the public fight stayed in the streets. Protests didn't stop. They got more disciplined, more organized, more cameras. People started wearing goggles and bringing medics, not because they planned violence, but because they expected it. And that's one of the ugliest consequences of incidents like this. They don't just injure a person, they reshape a community's expectations. They turn civic life into something you prepare for like a storm. Miles watched from his apartment sometimes, staying off his feet as his doctor told him to. He'd look at the live streams and feel two emotions at once. Pride that people didn't back down, and grief that they had to come armored with precautions just to chant in a public plaza. Behind the scenes, the case forced doors open. Depositions, internal emails, training materials, chains of command. And in those documents, Dana Reeves looked for one thing above all: pattern, because one bad decision is easy to excuse. A pattern is harder. There were complaints from other demonstrations, mentions of aggressive posture, references to agitators again. And then there was the detail that made Miles's sister Nia go quiet when she heard it. The agent had been flagged before, not for this exact thing, but for temperament, for escalation, for acting like every interaction was a contest, the kind of thing departments often try to handle quietly, move them, coach them, protect the institution, until the institution can't protect itself anymore. Months later, mediation began. Not in a courtroom with cameras, in conference rooms that smelled like coffee and copier paper. Miles sat with Dana, hands clasped tight. He didn't look like an activist hero. He looked like a guy who had been hurt and was still trying to understand why. Across the building, government attorneys did math, not moral math, risk math. What would a jury do with that side-angle video? What would they do with the word agitator? What would they do with a medical professional explaining what close-range chemical exposure does to eyes and lungs? And what would they do with an agent who never helped, never apologized, never slowed down? Dana laid out the terms. Not just money, policy, training requirements, clear written constraints on how force can be used at demonstrations, a commitment to discipline. She was asking for the kind of changes that make it harder for the next orange canister to fly. Because that's the real question. Do you want one check and a closed file? Or do you want the behavior to become expensive enough that people think twice? Miles struggled with the idea of settlement. People online would say, take them to trial. But people online don't sit in depositions for 8 hours. They don't get their medical history questioned. They don't relive the moment over and over, while someone tries to reframe it as your fault. Miles wanted something simpler. He wanted to walk outside without feeling like the air might burn again. He wanted to sleep without seeing orange. He wanted to know that if his little cousin ever went to a protest, an agent wouldn't feel free to aim at a face. Dana explained the truth. Trials are gambles. Settlements are control. They don't admit wrongdoing, but they can force terms that change behavior. And when the final agreement was drafted, it included more than a number. It included a set of rules that the government did not want to publicly debate in front of a jury. Because some fights aren't about guilt, they're about what you can't afford the public to see. When it ended, the press releases were predictable. Careful language, no admissions, but the outcome spoke anyway. Miles didn't walk away feeling like he won. He walked away feeling like he survived, and that's an ugly standard for justice. But it's the one too many people are offered. The agent didn't become a household name. Institutional systems rarely offer you that satisfaction. What they offer is something colder. Consequences in paperwork. A career path altered. A policy rewritten. A quiet internal memo that says, in polite language, what the video screamed. You can't do that again. Not like that. Not with cameras watching. Not with the public ready, not when the story won't die. Weeks after it was over, Miles went back to the same plaza. Not to protest, to stand. He wore a different hoodie that day, not green. He wasn't trying to make a point. He was trying to reclaim a piece of himself. He stood near a concrete planter and watched office workers walk by like nothing had happened there. He watched tourists take pictures of the building. He watched a man in a suit drink coffee on a bench, and he realized the strangest thing about public trauma. The place stays open, the flags still wave, the stone still looks clean. It's the people who carry the scorch marks. Miles closed his eyes and took a slow breath. The air didn't burn, not today. He opened his eyes and looked at the cameras mounted high on the building corners. He didn't feel comforted, but he did feel one thing. Certainty that the next time something happened here, there would be footage. And sometimes, footage is the only reason the truth survives. So what do you do with a story like this? If you reduce it to a headline, You miss the mechanics. A protest, a label, an orange canister, a green hoodie. A decision made in a second, and then a slow, grinding process that drags the decision into daylight. This story isn't just about one agent. It's about how easily order becomes an excuse for harm, how quickly a person becomes an agitator instead of a citizen, how fast a tool becomes a weapon when the target is someone you've already decided doesn't deserve gentleness. And it's about what happens when a community refuses to let the moment disappear. Because if no one filmed, if no one uploaded, if no one demanded records, then Miles would have been another nameless person coughing on a sidewalk while the official report stayed clean. But the video didn't stay quiet, and neither did the people watching. Let me ask you this. If you were there, standing behind Miles and watching that orange canister flash through the air, what would you have done? Would you have kept chanting like nothing happened, hoping it wouldn't happen to you? Would you have rushed in to help, even if it meant breathing it in too? Or would you have done what so many people did that day? Raise your phone, hit record, and decide that the only way to survive moments like this is to make sure they can't be denied? Tell me in the comments what you think, because the next time a line of agents forms outside a federal building and someone in a hoodie steps forward with nothing but words, the outcome will depend on the same things it depended on in Rivergate. Who gets labeled a threat? Who gets treated like a person? And whether the truth gets to exist longer than the report.
Please, step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them.
I work here. This is my car.
You don't belong back here. ID. Now.
My hospital badge is right here.
Those can be fake. Move. Now.
The first thing she noticed wasn't the siren. It was the silence. That strange, late-night hospital silence that only happens after a long shift, when the last visitors have gone home. The elevators sigh instead of chatter, and the parking lot feels like an empty hallway under the sky. Nia Thompson stepped out through the employee entrance with her tote bag digging into one shoulder, and her badge still clipped to her scrub top, like she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her skin. Her feet ached in that deep way that doesn't show up until you stop moving. 12 hours of beeping monitors. 12 hours of families asking the same terrified question in different voices. 12 hours of trying to keep a calm face while your body runs on caffeine and duty. She crossed the sidewalk toward the staff lot, breathing in cold air that smelled like damp asphalt and disinfectant drifting from the loading dock. Her car was where she always left it. Same corner, same row, under the same flickering light that never quite decided whether it wanted to work. Nia dug her keys out of her bag, and that's when headlights snapped on. Bright, sudden, like someone had aimed a spotlight at her life. A police cruiser rolled in, slow and deliberate, tires crunching over gravel. It didn't pass through. It stopped, angled, blocking the lane like a warning. Then the voice came, flat through a loudspeaker, like it belonged to a man who'd already decided the ending. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them." Nia froze, not because she was guilty, because she recognized the tone. The kind of tone that turns ordinary into dangerous in a single sentence. Her hands lifted instinctively, palms open. I'm just getting in my car," she called back. A door opened, a boot hit the ground, and an officer walked toward her with the stiff posture of someone who believed control was the same thing as safety. This is the story of how a black nurse leaving a hospital after midnight was treated like a threat. How one officer's routine check turned into a public humiliation in a place she'd saved lives. And how a body camera captured enough to force a $1.5 million settlement that nobody expected, except the people who'd lived this pattern before. Before we go deeper, quick question. Where are you watching from? Drop your city, state, or country in the comments, because the unsettling part about stories like this is how familiar they feel in places that swear they're not like that. Now, back to that parking lot. Because the officer wasn't walking toward Nia like he was there to help. He was walking toward her like she was a problem. The hospital was called Mercy Ridge Medical Center, one of those regional facilities that served everyone from newborns to retirees, from highway accident victims to people who just needed stitches at 2 a.m. It wasn't glamorous. It was necessary. And Nia had spent the last 6 years making herself necessary inside those walls. She wasn't a new hire. She wasn't a visitor. She wasn't loitering. She was the nurse who caught sepsis before it turned into a funeral. The nurse who coached scared parents through breathing treatments. The nurse who stayed 10 minutes past her shift to hold an older man's hand because nobody else was there. Tonight had been brutal even by hospital standards. A pediatric asthma flare, a car wreck, a code blue that left the entire floor, wired, quiet, and shaky afterward. When Nia finally clocked out, she felt like her bones had been borrowed. All she wanted was her car, her seat heater, silence, and a shower that could wash the night off her skin. Instead, she got a cruiser. The officer stopped 5 feet away. White male, mid-30s, clean uniform, a jaw that looked like it lived in permanent irritation. His nameplate read, H-A-R-R-I-S. His body camera sat on his chest with a small blinking light, a witness that couldn't be intimidated. "Step back from the car," he repeated, voice sharper now. Nia did exactly what he said. She took 2 slow steps back and stayed under the lamp. "Officer," she said carefully, "I work here. I'm leaving my shift. This is my vehicle." Harris looked her up and down, not like a person, like a story he didn't trust. "Who said you could park here?" he asked. Nia blinked. "It's the employee lot," she said. "I'm an employee." He didn't acknowledge the badge clipped to her chest. He didn't glance at the hospital logo on her scrubs. He stared at her face like he was searching for an excuse. "We got a call," he said. "A call?" "Suspicious person in the staff lot," he replied. "Someone reported you." The sentence landed like a weight. Suspicious, the most flexible word in the American dictionary. It can mean a broken window, or it can mean a black woman alone at night in a place someone else thinks she shouldn't be. Nia felt her stomach tighten. "I'm not suspicious," she said, still calm. "I'm exhausted." Harris stepped closer. "ID," he said. Nia lifted a hand toward her badge. "This is my hospital, ED," she said. "I said ID," Harris snapped, as if her badge didn't count because it came from the wrong authority. Nia hesitated. Not long. Just enough to do that mental math every black professional learns early. If I move too fast, he'll say I'm reaching. If I move too slow, he'll say I'm resisting. If I ask why, he'll say I'm arguing. So she narrated. "I'm going into my bag," she said. "My wallet is inside." Harris rolled his eyes. "Don't get cute," he muttered. Nia's hand slipped into her tote and found her driver's license. She held it out. Harris took it, glanced at it, and immediately found the angle he wanted. "This address isn't the hospital," he said. Nia stared. "It's my home address," she replied. "That's how IDs work." Harris's lips tightened. "So you're saying you work here?" he said slowly, "but you can't prove it." Nia pointed, gently, controlled, at the badge still hanging from her chest. "I can," she said. "Right here." Harris didn't look. "Take it off," he said. "What?" "Take the badge off and hand it to me," he repeated. Nia felt heat creep up her neck. She reached for the clip. And that's when Harris said the first thing that told her this wasn't about procedure. "People steal those," he said. Nia froze with her fingers on the lanyard. Stole. A nurse. In scrubs. Leaving a hospital. Accused of stealing a badge to... What? Stand in an employee lot and wait for police? The logic didn't matter. The feeling did. Harris wanted her small. He wanted her apologetic. He wanted her proving herself. And Nia realized something in that moment that hit like cold water. If she didn't have cameras, witnesses, and paperwork, he could turn this into anything. The hospital's security cameras were mounted high on poles at the edge of the lot. But security cameras don't always tell the story clearly. They give you angles, distance, silent footage. The body camera, though? The body camera gives you tone, gaze, words. And Harris didn't realize what he was handing Nia, simply by keeping that thing running. Because as he stepped closer, he leaned his head slightly and spoke low. "Let me tell you something," he said. "This lot has rules, and people like you don't get to decide them." "People like you?" Nia's face stayed still, but inside something hardened. "What does that mean?" she asked. Harris's eyes narrowed. "It means stop acting like you run things," he said. "You're going to do what I say." Nia felt the urge to look around, see if anyone was watching, but the lot was mostly empty. A few cars, a distant hum of traffic, and one person pushing a mop bucket near the loading dock, head down, pretending not to see. Nia did what she'd learned to do in emergencies. She anchored her voice. "Officer Harris," she said, reading his nameplate like she wanted it on record. "I am a registered nurse. I am leaving my shift. I want to go home. If you have a reason to detain me, tell me. If not, I'd like to get in my car." Harris laughed once, a short, humorless sound. "You want to play lawyer?" he said. "We can play. You're trespassing until you prove you're allowed to be here." Trespassing in an employee parking lot at her place of work. Nia took a breath. "Do you want to call the hospital?" she asked. "I can have my supervisor come down. Security can verify me." Harris's face tightened like she'd offended him by offering a solution. "I don't need your help doing my job," he said. Then, with the kind of swagger that shows up right before someone makes a mistake on camera, he added, "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to put your hands on the hood. I'm going to search your bag. And if you don't cooperate, you're going to spend the night in a cell." Nia's heart jumped. "Search my bag?" she repeated. "Yes," Harris said. "Now." "And what are you searching for?" Harris stepped closer again. "Contraband," he said. Nia stared at him. Contraband, in a nurse's tote bag. What he really meant was control. And then he did something that made the air change. His hand moved, hovered near his holster. Not drawing, not yet. Just close enough to remind her that his threat wasn't theoretical. This is the part where the story could have gone the way so many stories go. Quiet compliance. A woman humiliated, searched, and sent home shaking. An officer driving away with the belief that he'd handled something. And a complaint that gets lost in a system designed to absorb harm without changing. But this time, Nia had something most people don't. She had the habits of a person trained to document. Because nursing teaches you something early. If it isn't charted, it didn't happen. Nia didn't reach for her phone, not abruptly. She didn't make a dramatic announcement. She simply shifted her tote slightly, opened the side pocket with 2 fingers, and tapped her phone's screen. Audio record, not for the internet, for proof. Harris noticed anyway. "What are you doing?" he snapped. Nia kept her eyes steady. "I'm documenting," she said, "just like I do at work." Harris's face darkened. "You're not recording me," he said. "I'm recording my interaction," she replied. He stepped in closer, invading her space, voice dropping. "You think you're smart," he said. "Let's see how smart you look when you're face down on the asphalt." The sentence sat there, cold, unnecessary, a threat dressed up as authority. Nia's throat tightened, and then a voice came from behind her. "Officer, A man in a dark security jacket stood near the employee entrance, hospital security. He'd been doing rounds, he'd seen the cruiser, and he'd decided to stop pretending not to see. Harris turned. "This is police business," he said. The security guard didn't flinch. "She's staff," he said. "I see her all the time. That's Nurse Thompson." For the first time, Harris actually looked, at the badge on her chest. Nia watched the gears grind, because here was the problem. If he backed down now, he'd have to admit he was wrong, and some people would rather escalate than feel embarrassed. Harris's jaw tightened. "Then why'd we get a call?" he barked. The security guard shrugged. "People call about anything," he said. "But she works here. You can verify with HR. I can call her floor supervisor right now." Harris stared at him, then at Nia. And instead of apologizing, of course he didn't, he chose a different exit. He pivoted the blame. "Well, she was being uncooperative," he said. Nia's eyes widened. "Uncooperative?" she repeated. "I answered every question." Harris pointed at her. "Don't point your finger at me," he snapped. "I didn't." "Hands on the hood!" Harris barked again. The security guard stepped forward. "She's staff," he said. "I see her all the time. That's Nurse Thompson." For the first time, Harris actually looked, at the badge on her chest. Nia watched the gears grind, because here was the problem. If he backed down now, he'd have to admit he was wrong, and some people would rather escalate than feel embarrassed. Harris's jaw tightened. "Then why'd we get a call?" he barked. The security guard shrugged. "People call about anything," he said. "But she works here. You can verify with HR. I can call her floor supervisor right now." Harris stared at him, then at Nia. And instead of apologizing, of course he didn't, he chose a different exit. He pivoted the blame. "Well, she was being uncooperative," he said. Nia's eyes widened. "Uncooperative?" she repeated. "I answered every question." Harris pointed at her. "Don't point your finger at me," he snapped. "I didn't." "Hands on the hood!" Harris barked again. The security guard stepped forward. "Officer," he said carefully, "she's not a suspect. This is a staff lot. She's leaving work." Harris's eyes flashed. "You want to interfere?" he said. The security guard held up his hands. "I'm trying to de-escalate," he replied. De-escalate. A word that suddenly felt like it belonged to a different universe than Harris's ego. Nia's phone kept recording, and Harris, still lit up by the body cam, said the line that would later become the spine of the case. "You people always want special treatment," he said. "Not tonight." If you've ever had a moment where your professional identity evaporates in front of someone's prejudice, you understand what Nia felt. She wasn't Nurse Thompson to him. She wasn't ma'am. She wasn't a tired human being trying to go home. She was a category, and categories are easy to threaten. Nia swallowed and did what she did with panicked patience. She slowed everything down. "Officer Harris," she said, "I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking to be treated normally. Please stop threatening me. Please let me leave." Harris leaned in. "Or what?" he said. The security guard's radio crackled. A second security officer was arriving, and somewhere inside the hospital, a nurse manager on night shift was being called down, because the security guard wasn't just going to watch this happen. Harris heard the radio. You could see it on the body cam later, the exact moment he realized more witnesses were coming. His posture shifted. Not kinder, just more careful. He stepped back a half step. "Fine," he said, as if he was granting mercy instead of correcting his own behavior. "Let's verify." The nurse manager arrived in a navy cardigan, hair pulled back, eyes sharp with that hospital leadership fatigue. "What's going on?" she asked. Harris gestured at Nia like she was a nuisance. She was suspicious, he said. The nurse manager stared at him. She's my charge nurse, she said. She's been on shift since 7 p.m. You can check her badge. You can check her time card. She works here. Harris's cheeks reddened. All right, he muttered. Just checking. Still no apology, still no acknowledgement of the threat. He thrust Nia's license back toward her. Next time, he said, don't make it hard. Nia took the license with a steady hand, and in the audio, you can hear her exhale. Not relief, control. Because she knew something now. He hadn't just harassed her, he'd done it on camera. Nia drove home with both hands on the wheel, and her heart still pounding like she'd sprinted. When she pulled into her apartment complex, she sat in her car for a full minute without moving. Her phone was still in her cup holder. Recording stopped, file saved. She stared at it like it was a tiny piece of justice. Small, fragile, but real. Inside, she washed her hands 3 times. Not because they were dirty, but because she couldn't shake the feeling of being handled. The next morning, her supervisor called. Nia, she said softly. Security told me what happened. Are you okay? Nia laughed once. Not funny, just disbelief. No, she said. I'm not, and I'm not letting it go. That's the moment the story changed. Because the harassment wasn't the end. It was evidence. Hospitals are bureaucracies. Police departments are bureaucracies. And bureaucracies have a reflex. Protect the institution. Minimize the incident. Reduce a human experience into a line on a form. When Nia filed a complaint with the department, she got the familiar language. We take all allegations seriously. We will review the matter. We are committed to professionalism. But professionalism isn't a slogan. It's a tone, and the tone was on the body cam. So Nia did what a lot of people don't have the energy to do after being shaken. She got organized. She requested the incident number. She asked for the body cam footage. She asked the hospital for security camera angles. She asked the security guard to write a statement. And she reached out to a civil rights attorney whose name had been passed around quietly among healthcare workers like a survival tip. His name was Daniel Reyes. He didn't promise miracles, he promised process. He listened to Nia's recording. Once, then again, and when it ended, he went quiet. Did he ever say you were free to leave? He asked. No, Nia replied. Did he threaten arrest? Yes. Did he threaten force? Nia's throat tightened. Yes. Daniel nodded slowly. Okay, he said. This isn't just rude. This is coercion. This is unreasonable detention. And the language he used, on his own body cam, turns this into something a jury will understand instantly. Nia stared at him. You think we can win? Daniel leaned forward. I think they're going to want to settle, he said. Here's the part people misunderstand about settlements. A city doesn't pay big money because it feels guilty. It pays because it feels vulnerable. Discovery is where that vulnerability gets exposed. Emails, training records, prior complaints, dispatch logs, body cam footage. And the most dangerous thing for a department isn't just one bad night on video. It's a pattern. Because if Officer Harris had done this before, if there were prior complaints about how he treated people who didn't belong in his mental picture of a place, then one night in a hospital parking lot becomes a much bigger story. When Daniel filed the lawsuit, the city responded the way cities do. They denied everything. They claimed Harris was responding to a suspicious person call. They said he acted in the interest of public safety. They argued he needed to verify identity, but then they had to hand over the footage. And footage doesn't care about legal strategy. It just plays. In the video, Harris didn't sound careful. He sounded irritated. He sounded possessive. He sounded like he believed a hospital lot belonged to his authority more than it belonged to the staff who kept the place running. You people like you. Face down on the asphalt. A jury doesn't need a law degree to understand what those phrases mean, and a city attorney doesn't need a jury trial to know what those phrases can cost. Mediation was scheduled in a bland office building with beige walls and stale coffee. Nia sat beside Daniel at a long table, hands clasped so tight her knuckles looked pale. On the other side of the hall, the city's lawyers sat with risk managers. Officer Harris wasn't there. He rarely is. In these cases, the institution wants distance from the face of the problem. The mediator, a former judge with tired eyes, walked between rooms like a man trying to calm two storms. First offer, a low number, a non-apology, a promise of training. Daniel didn't blink. "No," he said. "Second offer, higher. Still not serious." Daniel shook his head again. Nia sat quietly, listening to numbers float through the air like they were measurements of what her dignity was worth. She wasn't thinking about payday. She was thinking about the moment Harris's hand hovered near his holster. She was thinking about that sentence, face down on the asphalt, and how quickly a threat can become a headline. She was thinking about how many other nurses, techs, janitors, and security guards walked through that lot alone at night. If this happened to her, how many times had it happened to someone with less leverage and no recording? The mediator returned again. This time his voice changed. Less negotiation, more warning. "They don't want this in front of a jury," he said. Daniel nodded. "Then they know what to do," he replied. An hour later, the number arrived. $1.5 million, with conditions, no admission of wrongdoing, confidentiality language, policy revisions, a commitment to retraining, a review of complaints, money and paper trying to contain a moment that should have never existed. Nia heard the number and felt nothing like triumph. She felt tired, and, surprisingly, she felt grief. Because the fact that a hospital nurse needed a 7-figure settlement to be treated like a human being was its own kind of indictment. Daniel leaned in. "You don't have to take it," he whispered. "We can go to trial." Nia looked down at her hands. Then she looked up. "What happens if we go to trial?" she asked. Daniel was honest. "It takes years," he said. "It gets public. They'll dissect your life. They'll try to make you look difficult, and it will keep you living in that parking lot over and over." Nia closed her eyes for a moment. Then she said the sentence that sounded like defeat, but wasn't. "I want it to stop," she said. So she signed. When the settlement happened, the city didn't hold a press conference saying, "We were wrong." They rarely do. They issued a short statement about resolving a dispute. They emphasized that the officer acted within the scope of his duties, even as they wrote a check that said the opposite in the only language they couldn't spin. Inside the hospital, the news traveled faster, not as gossip, as caution, as validation. Nurses whispered in break rooms. Security officers nodded quietly. A few older staff members said, "I'm glad she didn't let that slide." And Nia, still doing her job, still walking those halls, noticed something shift. The lot had more lighting installed. Security increased patrols. The hospital updated policies about police interactions on campus. Not because the hospital suddenly discovered empathy, because they discovered liability, and liability makes institutions move. As for Officer Harris, the official statements were vague. Administrative review, internal investigation, reassignment. Some consequences that departments prefer to keep quiet. But the real consequence, the one that mattered, was that his behavior had a cost. Not absorbed, not ignored, not shrugged off, paid. Weeks later, Nia parked in the same staff lot. Same corner, same row. The flickering light still flickered, but the air felt different. Not safe, not magically fixed, just different. Because when she stepped out of her car this time, She didn't look over her shoulder immediately. She stood for a second, breathing in the night, and she realized something. The encounter hadn't just scared her, it had trained her to anticipate, to brace, to carry the weight of someone else's bias like it was her responsibility. The settlement didn't erase that, but it did something else. It took the cost of that bias and shoved it back where it belonged. On the institution, on the city, on the systems that keep telling people like Nia to be grateful for crumbs of normal treatment. Because what Harris demanded that night wasn't proof of identity, it was proof of belonging. And belonging is not something a nurse should have to argue for while wearing scrubs. So let me leave you with this. If you were Nia, tired, alone, leaving a hospital after midnight, what would you have done? Would you have complied in silence just to get home safe? Would you have fought in the moment and risked escalation? Or would you have done what she did? Document, endure, and then force the system to answer with consequences? Drop your answer in the comments, because how you respond to that question says a lot about what you've lived, and what you've had the luxury of never having to live. Because this story isn't rare. It just isn't always filmed. A vague call, a suspicious person, a parking lot, a badge, a threat, and a person who is forced to prove they have a right to exist in a space they already earned. Nia didn't break a law. She didn't steal a car. She didn't trespass. She didn't do anything except walk to her own vehicle after keeping strangers alive. And still, she was treated like a problem. Until the body cam showed the truth, until the paperwork showed the pattern, until a city wrote $1.5 million on a line and tried to call it resolution. But here's what that number really meant. It meant the evidence was loud. It meant the threats were real. It meant someone finally had to pay for the damage that usually gets handed to the person targeted. And it meant one more officer learned, too late, that a body camera doesn't protect you from accountability. It protects the truth.
Sir, you need to leave. We've had multiple complaints about you loitering and making people uncomfortable.
I'm just reading. This is a public library. I'm sitting here quietly with my books and laptop.
I don't care what you're doing. You need to leave now or you're going to be arrested.
The library's security cameras caught every second, every word, every overstep. Officer Daniel Reeves had no idea the man he was about to handcuff was anything but an ordinary patron. He was Marcus Webb, a civil rights attorney with 18 years of experience, a former federal prosecutor, and a lawyer who had successfully sued 3 police departments for racial profiling. What happened next would end Reeves's career, cost the city $3.8 million, and spark a Department of Justice investigation that exposed systemic racism in the Seattle Police Department. Drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from? If you believe you can be arrested for reading while black, hit that subscribe button. This story gets even more shocking. Seattle Central Library stands on 4th Avenue in downtown Seattle. Glass and steel architecture, 11 floors. Beret spot for your massive reading rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It isn't just a library, it's a community space where students study, professionals work remotely, homeless individuals find shelter, and citizens access information. The 3rd floor reading room is the quietest. Rows of study tables, individual carrels with desk lamps, computer terminals along the walls, signs everywhere. Silence, please. This is where Marcus Webb decided to work that Tuesday afternoon in March. Marcus Webb was 43 years old, Harvard Law School, top 10% of his class, 5 years as an assistant U.S. attorney prosecuting civil rights violations and federal crimes, 13 years in private practice specializing in police misconduct, employment discrimination, and constitutional law. He'd won landmark cases, $4.2 million settlement against Portland PD for wrongful arrest, $5.7 million against Tacoma PD for excessive force, $2.9 million against Spokane PD for racial profiling. He'd argued before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. He'd been quoted in the New York Times, Washington Post, and on NPR about police reform. He taught constitutional law as an adjunct professor at University of Washington Law School. Bar associations invited him to speak. Civil rights organizations consulted him on policy. At 43, Marcus Webb was exactly what he'd worked to become, one of the Pacific Northwest's most respected civil rights attorneys. That Tuesday afternoon, Marcus had a deposition scheduled for the next morning. Police excessive force case. He needed to review case law, prepare questions, organize exhibits. His office was being renovated. Workers everywhere. Construction noise making concentration impossible. So, he went to the library at 2:15 p.m. He found a table in the third floor, reading room near the windows. Natural light, quiet. He unpacked his laptop, his legal pad, 3 case law books he'd checked out from the law library, and a coffee he'd bought downstairs. He wore khakis, a button-down shirt, and a blazer. Professional, but casual. He looked like what he was, a lawyer working at a library. For 30 minutes he worked in peace. He took notes on his legal pad. He highlighted passages in the case, law books. He typed on his laptop. He sipped his coffee. He bothered no one. He spoke to no one. He was completely absorbed in his work. But to one person in that library, Marcus Webb's very presence became a problem, and that person chose to act on it. War in Jennifer Hollis was 52 years old. She'd been a reference librarian at Seattle Central Library for 14 years. She considered herself a guardian of library standards. She believed libraries should be quiet, orderly, respectable places. And lately, she'd become increasingly frustrated with what she called undesirable people using the library. Homeless individuals sleeping at tables, teenagers being loud, people who, in her mind, didn't belong. That afternoon, Jennifer noticed Marcus, a black man sitting alone at a table with books and a laptop. She watched him for 10 minutes. Something about him made her uncomfortable. She couldn't articulate what. He wasn't being loud, he wasn't bothering anyone, but he just didn't look right to her. He looked like he was casing the place, maybe planning to steal laptops, maybe dealing drugs. Her assumptions were entirely based on race, though she would never admit that to herself. Have you ever been profiled in a library or bookstore? Type yes or no in the comments. Jennifer approached the circulation desk where her colleague was working. There's a guy on the 3rd floor who's been there a while. I think he's loitering. Her colleague looked up. Is he causing problems? Not exactly, but he doesn't look like he's really here to read. He looks suspicious. Her colleague shrugged. If he's not causing problems, probably just leave him alone. Jennifer wasn't satisfied. She went to her supervisor. There's a suspicious individual on the 3rd floor. I think we should call security. The supervisor asked the same questions. Is he being disruptive, threatening anyone, violating library policy? Jennifer couldn't point to any specific violation, but she insisted something felt wrong. The supervisor, wanting to avoid conflict with a long-time employee, agreed to call building security. Building security arrived 10 minutes later. Officer Martin Chen had worked library security for 6 years. He was calm, professional, trained in de-escalation. He asked Jennifer to show him the suspicious person. They walked to the 3rd floor. Jennifer pointed at Marcus, still sitting quietly, reading his case law book, taking notes. That's him. He's been here over 30 minutes. Officer Chen observed for a moment. He's just reading. What's the problem? He doesn't look like he belongs here. Chen, who was Asian American and had experienced his own share of profiling, immediately understood what was happening. Ma'am, this is a public library. Everyone belongs here. I'm not going to bother someone who's reading quietly. Jennifer's face flushed. Fine, I'll call the police. Chen tried to stop her. That's not necessary. He's not breaking any laws. Jennifer walked away and called 911. Anyway, Seattle Police Dispatch received the call at 3:02 p.m. There's a suspicious individual at Seattle Central Library, 3rd floor. Caller reports he's been loitering for an extended period and making patrons uncomfortable. What's he doing that's suspicious? Just sitting there. He looks out of place. Is he threatening anyone? Being disruptive. Not according to the caller, but she insists something's wrong. A unit was dispatched. Officer Daniel Reeves responded. Officer Daniel Reeves was 36 years old, 9 years with Seattle PD, and in those 9 years, he'd compiled a record that should have ended his career long ago. 16 complaints, 16 tours, 12 specifically alleged racial profiling or excessive force against people of color, 6 sustained with written reprimands and mandatory retraining. 10 closed does not sustain despite witness statements. The pattern was clear and documented. Reeves saw black and brown people as inherently suspicious, inherently criminal, inherently threatening. 4 years earlier, Reeves stopped a black teenager skateboarding in a park, detained him for an hour, searched his backpack without consent, found nothing. The teenager's father was a city councilman. Complaint filed, sustained. Reeves received a written reprimand. 2 years ago, Reeves responded to a noise complaint at an apartment complex. When he arrived, he found a group of black college students having a study session. He demanded IDs from everyone, ran warrants checks, threatened to arrest them for disturbing the peace, even though neighbors said the noise complaint was about a different unit. Students filed complaints, not sustained. 6 months ago, Reeves stopped an Asian American driver for a traffic violation. During the stop, he made comments about the driver's English and asked where he was really from. The driver was born in Seattle, spoke perfect English, and recorded the entire encounter. Complaint filed, sustained. Reeves received mandatory diversity training, but despite 16 complaints over 9 years, Reeves remained on patrol because the system prioritized protecting officers over protecting communities. When Reeves received the library call, his mind immediately constructed a narrative. Suspicious person at library, probably homeless, probably on drugs, probably trespassing. He arrived at 3:14 p.m., parking his patrol car at the main entrance. He walked into the library, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and found Jennifer waiting. She pointed across the reading room. That's him, the one in the blazer at the table by the windows. Reeves looked. He saw a black man sitting alone with books and a laptop. In Reeves's biased mind, that confirmed the complaint. Black man, public space obviously doesn't belong. Reeves walked directly toward Marcus's table. Marcus was reading a Supreme Court decision about Fourth Amendment search and seizure when he became aware of someone standing next to his table. He looked up, a police officer, arms crossed, staring down at him. "Can I help you?" "Officer, you need to leave. Excuse me, this is a public library. I'm studying. Multiple complaints about you loitering, making people uncomfortable." Marcus blinked, confused. "Loitering? I've been here 30 minutes reading legal case law. I'm an attorney preparing for a deposition. I have books checked out. I have my laptop. I'm not loitering. I don't care what you claim to be. You need to leave now." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He recognized what was happening. This wasn't about loitering or complaints. This was about a black man in a space where someone decided he didn't belong. "Officer, I'm not leaving. I'm a library patron engaged in legitimate research. I'm not violating any policy. I'm not disturbing anyone. I have every right to be here. This is your last warning. Leave or you're being arrested." Marcus made a decision. He could leave, avoid confrontation, let this violation go unchallenged, or he could assert his rights, document this injustice, and hold the system accountable. He chose assertion. Should libraries train staff to recognize racial bias before calling police? Let me know in the comments. Officer, what's your name and badge number? Reeves, 3174. Officer Reeves, I'm Marcus Webb. I'm a civil rights attorney. I've been sitting here quietly for 30 minutes reading case law for a deposition tomorrow. I'm not loitering. I'm not disturbing anyone. I'm exercising my right to use a public library. If you arrest me for this, you're violating my Fourth Amendment rights, and I will file a federal lawsuit. Reeves's jaw tightened. Are you threatening an officer? I'm not threatening. I'm informing you of the legal consequences of your actions. You're about to make a very expensive mistake. Several other library patrons had noticed the confrontation. Phones came out. People started recording. A woman at a nearby table spoke up. Officer, excuse me. I've been sitting here for 2 hours. That man hasn't done anything wrong. He's been reading quietly the whole time. This is inappropriate. Reeves didn't even look at her. Ma'am, stay out of this. Another patron, a man in his 60s, stood up. I'm a retired attorney. I've been watching this entire interaction. This officer has no legal basis to remove this gentleman. This is harassment. Reeves's hand moved to his handcuffs. Sir, I'm not going to ask again. Turn around, hands behind your back. Marcus closed his laptop slowly. He placed his legal pad on top. Then he stood, keeping his hands visible. I'm complying under protest, Marcus said loudly, making sure his voice carried across the reading room. I am Marcus Webb, civil rights attorney. I've been sitting in this public library for 30 minutes reading case law. I violated no law, no policy, no regulation. This officer is arresting me for reading while black. Everyone here is witnessing this. Please record it. At least 5 people were recording now. The library security cameras were capturing everything from multiple angles. Marcus turned around and placed his hands behind his back. Reeves grabbed his wrists roughly and snapped handcuffs on deliberately tight. The metal dug into Marcus's skin. He winced, but said nothing. You're under arrest for trespassing and obstruction. Trespassing in a public library. Obstruction by sitting quietly and reading. Officer Reeves Bird, you just arrested a civil rights attorney who specializes in suing police departments for exactly this kind of constitutional violation. I've won $13 million in settlements over my career. You're about to be my next case. Reeves marched Marcus toward the elevator. Other patrons were standing now, phones out, recording everything. The woman who had spoken up earlier called out, "This is wrong. He didn't do anything." Someone else shouted, "His name is Marcus Webb. He's an attorney. Look him up." Reeves pushed Marcus into the elevator. As the doors closed, Marcus looked back at the reading room. He saw the phones recording. He saw the witnesses. He saw the evidence being documented. The case was already building itself. The elevator descended to the ground floor. Reeves walked Marcus through the main lobby. The circulation desk staff stared. Patrons turned to watch. A man in handcuffs being led out of a library for reading. Reeves guided Marcus outside to his patrol car. He opened the back door. "Get in." Marcus ducked into the back seat. Cramped space, plastic seats, plexiglass windows, smell of disinfectant. Reeves got in front and picked up his radio. Dispatch, Unit 14. 1 in custody. Male, black, approximately 40 years old. Arrested for trespassing at Seattle Central Library. Transporting to West Precinct. The dispatcher's voice came back. Copy Unit 14. What's the suspect's name? Reeves glanced back. What's your name? Marcus Webb. Spell that last name. Wee BB. The dispatcher paused. Unit 14. Can you describe the nature of the trespassing? Suspect was loitering in the library reading room. Library staff called it in. Multiple complaints. Unit 14. Did you verify with library management that the suspect was actually trespassing or violating library policy? Do you think officers should verify complaints before making arrests in public spaces? Drop your answer. Reeves hesitated. Negative. Library staff reported it. That was sufficient. Unit 14, please stand by. Need to verify something. Reeves sat there, engine idling. In the back seat, Marcus sat perfectly still. He'd been in difficult situations before. He'd faced hostile judges, aggressive opposing counsel, threatening defendants. But this was different. This was being treated like a criminal for reading in a library. The radio crackled. Unit 14, I'm showing a Marcus Webb as a licensed attorney in Washington State. Civil rights practice. Multiple high-profile cases. You need to verify this arrest is legitimate before proceeding. Dispatch, the arrest is made. I responded to a complaint. I understand, but I'm advising you to return to the library and verify with management before transport. Confirm the suspect actually violated library policy. Reeves's face went pale. He sat staring at the steering wheel. Then he got out of the car and walked back into the library. Marcus watched through the window. He could see Reeves talking to library staff at the circulation desk. He could see Jennifer Hollis, the librarian who'd called it in, gesturing animatedly. He could see Building Security Officer Chen shaking his head. 5 minutes passed. Reeves came back out, walking slower, shoulders slumped. He opened Marcus's door. Sir, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm going to release you. A misunderstanding? Marcus kept his voice level. You arrested me for reading in a library. You handcuffed me in front of dozens of witnesses. You marched me out like a criminal, and now you're calling it a misunderstanding. Reeves unlocked the handcuffs. Marcus rubbed his wrists. Red marks circled them where the metal had pressed into skin. Officer Reeves, what you just did is called a Fourth Amendment violation. Arrest without probable cause, false imprisonment, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and I'm a civil rights attorney who's built my entire career on cases exactly like this. Sir, I was responding to a complaint. Library staff reported suspicious activity. Suspicious activity? I was reading. Let me be very clear about what happened here. A librarian saw a black man sitting quietly with books and decided I was suspicious. She called you. You responded and immediately assumed I was criminal. You didn't verify the complaint. You didn't check library policy. You didn't ask library management. You just saw a black man and arrested him. That's racial profiling, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. Marcus pulled out his phone. He had recordings to collect, witnesses to contact, and a lawsuit to prepare. Reeves tried one more time. Sir, if you just cooperated and left when asked to leave a public library for reading, that's not a lawful order. That's discrimination, and cooperation with unlawful orders isn't required. Marcus called his law partner. James, it's Marcus. I was just arrested at Seattle Central Library for reading while black. I need you to get down here immediately. Collect witness statements. Get copies of all security footage. Contact the library administration and prepare a federal civil rights complaint. We're suing Seattle PD and the city of Seattle. Within 20 minutes, Marcus's law partner, James Morrison, arrived with 2 associates. Within 30 minutes, they'd collected statements from 7 witnesses who'd recorded the incident. Within an hour, they'd secured copies of security footage from 4 different camera angles showing everything. Marcus sitting quietly, reading, Reeves approaching aggressively. The arrest without cause. The march through the library. Within 2 hours, the story was on local news. Civil rights attorney arrested at library for reading. The video footage was devastating. Marcus Webb, well-known civil rights attorney, sitting at a table with law books and a laptop, being handcuffed and arrested while witnesses protested and recorded. The story went viral immediately. Within 3 hours, 300,000 views. Within 6 hours, over 2 million. Within 24 hours, 8 million people had watched a black attorney being arrested for reading in a library. The comment section exploded. If a Harvard law graduate and civil rights attorney can be arrested for reading, no black person is safe. This is exactly why we need police reform. That officer had no idea who he was messing with. Marcus Webb has won millions in civil rights cases. Seattle PD is about to pay. Local legal community responded immediately. The Washington State Bar Association issued a statement condemning the arrest. The King County Bar Association called for an investigation. The ACLU announced they were monitoring the case. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund offered support. National civil rights organizations reached out. This wasn't just a wrongful arrest. This was a prominent civil rights attorney being profiled and arrested while doing his job. The symbolism was powerful and damning. Seattle Police Department issued a statement that evening. We are aware of an incident involving one of our officers and a member of the legal community. The matter is under investigation by our Office of Professional Accountability. We take all allegations seriously. The statement was careful, neutral, admission of nothing. It satisfied no one. By Wednesday morning, pressure was mounting. Seattle Mayor's office received hundreds of calls demanding accountability. City council members issued statements. Local media ran continuous coverage. Marcus's law firm held a press conference. Marcus stood at a podium with his partners beside him. Yesterday, I was arrested at Seattle Central Library for the crime of reading while black. I'm a civil rights attorney. I've spent 18 years fighting police misconduct and racial profiling. I've won landmark cases establishing constitutional protections. And despite all of that, despite my education, my credentials, my experience, I was still handcuffed and arrested for sitting quietly in a library with law books. He paused. This arrest wasn't about loitering or library policy. It was about a librarian who saw a black man and decided I was suspicious. It was about an officer who responded and immediately assumed I was criminal. It was about a system that allows officers with 16 complaints to remain on patrol. It was about institutional racism that criminalizes black people for existing in public spaces. Another pause. I'm filing a federal lawsuit. Not for revenge, not for money, for accountability, for reform, for every black person who's been profiled, harassed, and arrested for living their lives. The press conference ended with Marcus answering questions. When asked about damages, he said, "This isn't about a settlement. This is about changing a system." When asked about Officer Reeves, he said, "Officer Reeves is a symptom. The disease is a department that tolerates officers with patterns of racial bias. Should officers with 10+ complaints be automatically removed from patrol? Comment below." Seattle PD Office of Professional Accountability launched an investigation immediately. Senior investigator Lieutenant Sarah Kim was assigned. Kim was a 16-year veteran known for thorough investigations and unwillingness to tolerate misconduct. She pulled Officer Reeves's complete personnel file. 9 years, 16 complaints, 12 alleging racial profiling or excessive force, 6 sustained. The pattern was undeniable. Kim watched security footage from the library. 4 camera angles showing everything. Marcus sitting quietly, reading, taking notes. Reeves approaching aggressively, hand near weapon. Marcus explaining he was an attorney, offering identification. Reeves dismissing everything, making arrest, witnesses protesting, phones recording. Kim interviewed the witnesses. All 7 told the same story. Marcus was sitting quietly reading. He wasn't disturbing anyone. The arrest was completely unjustified. Several witnesses specifically mentioned Marcus explaining he was an attorney and offering credentials. Reeves arrested him anyway. Kim interviewed library staff. Building Security Officer Chen was direct. The librarian who called you racially profiled that gentleman. He wasn't doing anything wrong. I told her that. She called police anyway. I tried to stop this. Kim interviewed Jennifer Hollis, the librarian who made the call. Hollis was defensive. He looked suspicious. He didn't look like he belonged there. Kim pressed. What specifically did he do that was suspicious? Hollis couldn't articulate anything. He just had a look. What look? You know, like he was up to something. Kim made a note. Racial profiling clear and documented. She pulled statistical data on Reeves's stops, searches, and arrests over his 9-year career. Black residents stopped at rates 4.1 times higher than department average. Hispanic residents, 3.3 times higher. Searches of black motorists, 4.8 times higher. Use of force against people of color, 3.7 times higher. Every statistical measure told the same story. Daniel Reeves was an officer whose policing was driven entirely by racial bias. Kim's investigation report was 52 pages. Officer Daniel Reeves violated department policy, state law, and federal constitutional rights. He arrested Marcus Webb without probable cause. He failed to verify the complaint before making arrest. He ignored witness statements confirming Webb's legitimate presence. He refused to verify Webb's credentials despite repeated offers. He used unnecessary force with tight handcuffs. The arrest was motivated by racial bias. Reeves observed a black man in a public space and immediately assumed criminal activity. He made no attempt to verify legitimacy, despite Webb's professional appearance, calm demeanor, and clear explanation. This pattern is consistent with Reeves's career. Analysis shows 16 complaints, 12 alleging racial profiling. Statistical analysis shows Reeves stops, searches, and uses force against people of color at rates dramatically higher than department averages. Officer Reeves's continued employment poses direct threat to public safety and community trust. Recommended immediate termination. Seattle Police Chief Adrienne Martinez read the report over a weekend, watched all videos, reviewed statistics. Monday morning, he made his decision. Officer Daniel Reeves was fired. Termination letter was delivered by Lieutenant Kim, 6 pages listing every violation. Conclusion clear. Officer Daniel Reeves is terminated from Seattle Police Department, effective immediately for violation of department policy. Sparser, violation of constitutional rights. Unlawful arrest, pattern of racially biased policing, spanning entire career. This decision is final and not subject to appeal. Reeves's name was entered into National Decertification Index. At 36, his law enforcement career was over. He hired attorney Ronald Chen, who specialized in defending police officers. Chen reviewed the case, watched library security footage from 4 angles, read Marcus Webb's credentials, reviewed 16 complaint history, read statistical analysis showing clear racial bias, read Kim's 52-page report. Chen called Reeves. "Dan, I'm going to be honest. This is indefensible. You arrested a Harvard-educated civil rights attorney for reading in a library. It's on video from multiple angles. Witnesses recorded everything. Your personnel file shows 16 complaints with clear racial bias pattern. Department has ironclad termination case, and you arrested possibly the worst person you could have. Marcus Webb has won $13 million in civil rights settlements. He knows this area of law better than anyone. He's going to destroy you in court. What should happen to librarians who racially profile patrons? Let me know below." Chen's advice was clear. Withdraw appeal. Stay quiet. Don't speak to media. Pay attention. Moves on. Reeves withdrew, but Marcus Webb wasn't finished. The lawsuit was filed 8 weeks after the arrest. Marcus's firm prepared a complaint that was 41 pages long. Fourth Amendment violation, arrest without probable cause, false imprisonment and false arrest. 14th Amendment violation, denial of equal protection, deprivation of civil rights under color of law. 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Assault and battery through use of handcuffs, violation of Washington State Civil Rights Act, municipal liability for failure to train officers on racial bias, municipal liability for failure to supervise officers with documented patterns, municipal liability for negligent retention of officer with 16 complaints over 9 years. Named Officer Daniel Reeves individually in City of Seattle. Demanded compensatory damages, punitive damages, policy reforms, consent decree, with federal oversight. City Attorney's Office and insurance carrier brought in outside counsel. Defense firm specializing in law enforcement cases. They spent 3 days reviewing everything. Videos from 4 library cameras, body camera footage, witness statements from 7 people with recordings, Marcus Webb's credentials and reputation, Officer Reeves's 16 complaint history, statistical evidence of racial bias, Kim's 52-page investigation. Their conclusion was unanimous. This case is catastrophic. We have a Harvard Law civil rights attorney arrested for reading. Videos show everything. 7 witnesses with recordings. Officer has 16 complaints over 9 years with documented racial bias pattern. Plaintiff is one of the region's most respected civil rights lawyers who's won $13 million in similar cases. If this goes to trial, verdict could be 8 to 12 million times. City's insurance carrier agreed. Policy limit is $10 million. This goes to trial. We're looking at verdict that exceeds our coverage. Strongly recommend immediate settlement negotiations. City agreed. Settlement talks began 6 months after lawsuit filed. Marcus's team opened with demand. $7.5 million compensatory and punitive damages, plus comprehensive reforms, including consent decree with federal monitoring. City countered $1.8 million, no admission of wrongdoing, no policy commitments. Marcus's team didn't budge. They explained what trial would look like. We'll call every person officer Reeves stopped, searched, or arrested in 9 years. That's over 250 witnesses establishing pattern. We'll present statistical analysis showing his clear racial bias. We'll call expert witnesses on constitutional policing, who will testify Reeves violated every standard. We'll have Harvard law professors testify about Fourth Amendment. We'll make this a month-long trial with national media coverage. CNN, MSNBC, NPR in courtroom every day. And when jury returns verdict, it'll make national headlines because a Harvard Law civil rights attorney was arrested for reading City raised, offered $3.2 million. Lard Marcus's team held firm at $7.5 million. Negotiations stalled. Then Department of Justice Civil Rights Division announced they were opening pattern and practice investigation into Seattle PD. Investigation would examine whether department engaged in systemic racial discrimination. Changed everything. City couldn't fight federal lawsuit while under DOJ investigation. They needed this resolved. Final offer, $3.8 million. Comprehensive policy reforms. Agreement to cooperate with DOJ investigation. Marcus caucused with his partners. It wasn't the full amount they demanded, but it was substantial. And more importantly, reforms and DOJ cooperation would create lasting change. They accepted settlement announced at joint press conference. $3.8 million paid to Marcus Webb, one of the largest settlements for wrongful arrest in Washington state history, plus mandatory reforms. Annual mandatory training on racial bias for all officers conducted by independent experts. Early intervention system flagging any officer with 5 complaints in 3 years. Independent civilian oversight board with subpoena power and disciplinary authority. Officers must verify complaints with property managers before arrests on private or public property. All arrests must be reviewed by supervisor within 12 hours. Quarterly statistical analysis of stops, searches, arrests by race and officer. Any officer showing disparities over 2.0 times Department average triggers automatic investigation. Federal monitoring for 3 years. Annual public reporting of all complaints and discipline. Do you think 3.8 million is enough for being arrested for reading? Comment your thoughts. Marcus issued statement. This settlement represents accountability, but money alone doesn't create change. What matters are the reforms, the oversight, the commitment to addressing systemic racism. I was arrested because a librarian racially profiled me, and an officer with 16 complaints assumed I was criminal. That can't happen again. Not to me, not to anyone. Reporter asked about the money. Marcus answered, I'm donating 1.5 million to organizations providing legal aid to people of color who experience police misconduct. I'm using $1 million to establish a civil rights fellowship at University of Washington Law School for students who want to pursue police accountability work. The remaining $1.3 million covers my legal fees and compensates me for the trauma of being handcuffed in front of colleagues and community for reading. DOJ investigation into Seattle PD took 18 months, analyzed 60,000 stops over 8 years, reviewed thousands of body cameras, interviewed 250 officers and community members, released 178-page report. Seattle Police Department engaged in pattern of conduct violating 4th and 14th Amendments. Officers stopped people of color at rates significantly disproportionate to population. Black residents stopped 3.8 times higher rate. Hispanic residents, 3.1 times higher. Asian residents, 1.9 times higher. Disparities cannot be explained by crime rates or legitimate factors constitute racial discrimination. Searches of people of color occur at dramatically higher rates despite lower contraband recovery. Use of force disproportionately deployed against people of color. Complaint system inadequate. Complaints from communities of color routinely dismissed. Officers with clear bias patterns not disciplined or removed. Supervision inadequate to identify and e-stress. Problem officers. Seattle PD entered consent decree with DOJ, 104 pages, legally binding, federal oversight, 5 years. Any officer with 8 sustained complaints must be removed from patrol pending review. Any officer with 5 complaints in 2 years triggers mandatory intervention. All stops must be based on reasonable suspicion or probable cause clearly articulated. All searches must be based on probable cause or valid consent. Body cameras mandatory for all uniformed officers. Footage reviewed regularly. Enhanced training 60 hours annually on constitutional policing. De-escalation implicit bias. Independent civilian oversight board with full investigative and disciplinary authority. Quarterly statistical analysis with public reporting. Federal monitor with complete access and authority to report non-compliance. Seattle City Council held hearing on consent decree. Marcus testified, "What happened to me was not unique. It was documented. Thousands of people of color in Seattle experience profiling, harassment, unlawful stops every year. Most don't have Harvard law degrees. Most don't have resources to sue. Most suffer in silence. That's why this consent decree matters. It's not punishment, it's accountability. It's a blueprint for constitutional policing. It's protection for communities that have been targeted for too long. Consent decree approved unanimously." Seattle library case became national training example. DOJ uses library footage and civil rights training. Police mice show video as example of what not to do. Law schools teach case in constitutional law. One wrongful arrest at a library led to fired officer, $3.8 million settlement, comprehensive reforms, federal consent decree. Daniel Reeves never worked law enforcement again. Decertification index made him unemployable. Tried private security. Fired when employer learned his history. Tried retail loss prevention. Quit after being recognized by customers. Moved to different state. works construction under different name, gave one interview before leaving Seattle. Reporter asked by, "Do you believe you were wrong to arrest Marcus Webb?" Reeves answered, "I was responding to a complaint following procedures." Reporter pressed, "You arrested an attorney for reading on video from 4 angles with 7 witnesses, saying he did nothing wrong after he explained who he was. How is that following procedure?" Reeves stood and left without answering. Marcus Webb continued his civil rights practice. The arrest didn't slow him down. If anything, it strengthened his resolve. He's filed 6 more police misconduct cases since, winning 4 so far. Total settlements now exceed $18 million. He speaks at conferences about his experience, shows the library video, explains how even credentials, education, professional status don't protect you from racial profiling, but also how documentation, witnesses, and legal knowledge create accountability. He teaches his law students record everything. Know your rights, never accept injustice as inevitable, challenge it, document it, fight it. The library security footage is still available. You can watch it yourself. Marcus Webb, Harvard Law graduate, former federal prosecutor, civil rights attorney, sitting quietly at a table with law books and laptop, being arrested for reading. You can see Officer Reeves approach aggressively. You can see Marcus explain calmly who he is. You can see Reeves dismiss everything and make arrest. Anyway, you can see witnesses protesting and recording. You can see evidence of racial profiling playing out in real time. What's your biggest takeaway from this story? Drop it in the comments. Marcus's story matters because it proves that racism targets everyone regardless of education or status. Harvard Law degree, 18 years legal experience, $13 million in 1 cases. None of it protected him from being arrested for reading while black. Think about everyone without those credentials. Everyone who gets profiled, stopped, arrested without witnesses or recordings or legal knowledge to fight back. Everyone whose story doesn't make news because they're not prominent attorneys. Marcus's story also proves accountability is possible. Officer with 16 complaints finally fired. City paid $3.8 million. DOJ forced comprehensive reforms. System changed not because it wanted to, but because Marcus refused to accept injustice. If this opened your eyes to how racial profiling operates in everyday spaces, subscribe. We're bringing stories that challenge, inform, demand accountability. Share with someone who needs to understand what racial bias looks like. Not theories or statistics, but concrete reality captured on library cameras. Hit subscribe, drop comment. What reforms matter most? How do we prevent the next Officer Reeves? How do we protect people just trying to read, work, live their lives in public spaces? These questions matter because this isn't just Seattle or Reeves or Marcus. It's about every community where black and brown people are criminalized for existing. It's about whether we accept systems that protect racist officers or demand systems that protect the people they're supposed to serve. Thanks for watching this story. If it changed how you think about racial profiling and police accountability, you've learned something important today. Now take it further, share it, discuss it, demand better from your community institutions. Change happens when we refuse accepting anything less than justice.